Hi, I'm Henry Timms, and I am so honored to be with you today, virtually, for This Is Why, to celebrate the amazing work of your community and the contribution of the Innovia Foundation and all the people tied to it. And my topic today is the new power of generosity, two things I've spent some time thinking about. And I want to start by talking about the new power, what that is and what it means to all of us, and then expand into what that really means for generosity and for the work that you're doing. So let's start with this game. I imagine that many of you have wasted hours of your life back in the day on this game. For the younger people watching, this game is called Tetris. I think it's having a resurgence recently, but it was the biggest game of the 20th century. And the way Tetris worked, in many ways represented how the world worked. It was a top-down game. Somebody else set the rules. These blocks would fall down upon our heads, and our only job was to make them fit into neat lines again and again and again until eventually we would collapse under the pressure of the game. It was a Tetris world. It was not one where many people had much agency. We played our part. And think how different that is to this world. So you may recognize this clock tower. This is a game called Minecraft, and it is the most popular game of the 21st century. And interestingly, both with Tetris and with Minecraft, they are both block-based games. They're both made with blocks, but the way that they operate is very different. So the way that Minecraft works is there aren't a set of rules set by somebody else. It's not a single-player game, it's a multi-player game, and there's no prescription. It's not a top-down game, it's literally a bottom-up game. It is built by people all around the world who come together to create games together in a collaborative, more inclusive and more creative way. And actually during this lockdown period in Spokane, there's been a Minecraft server set up specifically to bring together people around community to think about how during this period where people are stuck indoors, we can create more together and collaborate more together. So think just for a moment about growing up playing either of those games. You had a Tetris childhood, right? You stayed in the lanes, you had a limited role to play, you waited for the blocks to fall and made them fit into lines, or you had a Minecraft childhood. You were growing up in a world where you were being encouraged to put your own stamp on things. You expected not to play by someone else's rules, but to build worlds in your own image. And when we think about that, that's a metaphor. Those two different ways of operating is a metaphor for the work I've done with my colleague Jeremy Hyamans around how power is shifting. So the argument we've made is that what's really changing in the world today is not technology per se, but actually power. The way in which power flows and the way in which you operate power. And we are leaving a world, a kind of Tetris world, where old power was the name of the game, right? Power was held by few. It tended to download onto people. It was very top down. It tended to be quite leader driven about kind of the dynamic individuals, and it tended to be quite closed up, right? So if you think about our businesses, our social institutions, our governments, our religions, they all operated with the old power suite of tools in their mind. And that is very different to what we are seeing emerging in this world where we are all so much more connected, which we think of as the new power world. And in the new power world, in the Minecraft mindset, it's a very different way that power operates. Power is actually made by many, not held by few. It's not about how you download your view onto the world, but how you can encourage the upload of other people. It's about peers, it's about sharing, it's about a greater sense of openness. So just think for a moment to draw some examples of this new power at work. Think about the social movements which have transformed our age, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion. They're all operating not in an old power way because the General Secretary sends out a memo and the local chapters make sure it all happens. They are distributed, decentralized networks where everyone comes together and plays their part in a much more collaborative, open and engaging kind of a way. Think too about some of the political phenomena we've seen around the world. Time and time again, you will see politicians from either side of the aisle come to power because they've worked out how to supercharge their new power support. It's true of Barack Obama. It's true of Donald Trump. It's true of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. All around the world, we're seeing these figures come along who can work out how to unleash the new power of participation to supercharge their work. And of course, it's true in business. If you look around the businesses which have kind of become the standout stories of our age, they're almost all businesses built on new power, built on this appetite for participation. So think about a Google, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb. All of these platforms are designed to take advantage of the need, the increasing need that we all have to participate, and the increasing sense we all have that we ought to be participating, that the world is something we ought to be shaping, not simply consuming. And that's really started to shift how we think about values. So as we think about this work of new power and old power, what's begun to happen is there have been these quite identifiable mindsets, different ways of thinking about how the world should work, that are shaping all of us. So in the old power world, we cared most about things like confidentiality, like managerialism, like expertise, like long-term affiliation. Think about, as an example, how a lot of our local institutions ran, our Lions Club, our churches, our synagogues. They worked on a sense of you had a limited role to play, you lived within the rhythms of these institutions, they went on for years and years and years, and you participated in a way that was constant, but not especially rewarding. And that's being challenged by the rise of this new power mindset, this group of people all around the world now who expect more transparency, who expect greater collaboration, who have this sense of this maker culture that they aren't waiting for experts to tell them what to do, but instead they want to put their own hands on the world and start to think about how they can play a role, and a much greater sense of informal decision making, much more about self-organization rather than the few at the center making decisions for the many. And just to take a beat on this slide, if you think about the strategic direction of the Innovia Foundation, a commitment to inclusion, a commitment to collaboration, a commitment to innovation. These are all things that cannot be fostered if a small group of people are centrally holding all of the power and releasing it at moments of their choosing. They will only work if people are engaging and in listening to communities and making space for communities, and in the way that you celebrate today the work that you do to make space for people to tell their stories. We often say this in the office, getting people to think about how that they can be a part of your mission on their terms, right? I think that's such an important idea for institutions. We used to think about how we can get people to play a part in our mission on our terms. But in the new power world for institutions, one of the great challenges is how do we get people to play a part in our mission on their terms? And so many of the stories that we celebrate today are about exactly that idea, that institutions are challenging themselves to transform, to be more nimble, to be more agile, and to bring some of these new power values to bear. But wait, I do not want you thinking that my argument to you today is new power is good, old power is bad. In fact, it is particularly important in this moment that organizations and communities like the one we celebrate today, like yours, recognize that actually many of the things that we celebrated in the old power world, which are under threat, could not be more important today. And in fact, the right blend for any organization is how do we have enough old power and enough new power so as we can use both when the world needs us to. And there's no more compelling example of that, of course, than the debate we're having right now around, or at least the debate we are hopefully going to have in 21 around vaccines. So if you think back a year or so, the World Health Organization laid out their 10 biggest challenges to the world, the 10 biggest risks that they saw. And 2 of those risks are particularly pertinent today. One was a global pandemic. The other one was vaccine hesitancy, the idea that people all around the world were not anti-vaxxers, but actually would just think twice, would need some convincing if a vaccine needed to be taken. And if you think about this argument I've made to you around old power and new power, and think about the coming debate around vaccination, the coming challenge of getting billions of people to vaccinate, if this is taken in an old power way, we are going to come up short, right? If a small number of experts insist that they know the truth and they have the science and they have the peer information and they've got 3 degrees and therefore everybody ought to listen to them, we've seen that tactic fail time and time again. But they're right. We need that expertise, we need that knowledge, we need that data, we need that science. But the great challenge is to blend the old power of expertise with a much more compelling way of spreading a message. One of the things the anti-vax community does particularly well is actually create community around their narrative. It's a very powerful, it's a very rewarding, it's a very positive community to be a part of, because they've worked out how they can give people bigger roles to play in spreading their message. So as we think about the stakes around new power, particularly in the year ahead, one of the great, I guess the great kind of defining themes of 2020 has been this remarkable spread of different things, right? We've seen the spread of misinformation, we've seen the spread of hate, we've seen the spread of fires, we've seen things spread in so many unexpected and damaging ways. And so one of the really interesting questions for all of us going forward is the positive spreads. What are those things that we can spread in positive ways that can start to counteract some of the challenges we see in our world? And that takes me to generosity. So I think one of the reasons I was so pleased to be a part of this today was I think your central belief around generosity is so right, that actually there is nothing more powerful in transforming communities than fostering a sense of generosity towards others. And for our world today, which faces so many challenges, of course, we need more than ever people to be able to take a pause, to find more in themselves and to find more in others. So I wanted to kind of think today about, if we were thinking about a generosity perspective, what does new power mean for generosity, for those looking to foster generosity in the world, to transform lives, to transform communities? How do we do that in more meaningful ways? And I wanted to share 3 conclusions I had on that work. The first is that increasingly we are all called to put our missions over our brands. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is we as institutions, we as leaders, often get stuck on the idea that the most important thing is credit, right? That we make sure that we get our logo in the right place, that we make sure that our chief executive gets the limelight, that we make sure that the change that we make in the world reflects well on us. It's an important idea, and not one I discount, right? It's very important that people do that work. It's very important that people and organizations raise the funds they need to raise. Having said all that, if we take up all the space ourselves, we leave very little space for others. It's really important, I think, as we think about generosity and change, that we create movements that are generous in how they're designed, so other people can own them as much as us. And of course, one of the projects I've been working on now for almost a decade is Giving Tuesday. And when we launched Giving Tuesday, I was working at the 92nd Street Y, which is a New York institution. And I remember we had we were talking about it internally, and I was saying, look, we've got this idea, it's going to be Black Friday, and then there's Cyber Monday, and then we'll do Giving Tuesday, and it will be this day of generosity. And one of my board members said, sounds great, but where's the 92nd Street Y logo going to go? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, is it going to go between the Giving and the Tuesday? And I said, no, we're not going to put our logo on it. Because if we put our logo on it, if we stamp it with our brand, then nobody else will stamp it with theirs. No one else will be able to co-own a good new power principle, co-own the work that we're doing. And so with Giving Tuesday, which of course we've been so inspired by the Innovia Foundation and the way that you have created a community around Giving Tuesday in exactly this way, which is putting the mission over the brand, which is fostering the community to allow greater generosity, but taking a back seat in that work. What we've seen with Giving Tuesday, and you can see here these logos, is as it's moved around the world, other people have taken the idea and made it culturally relevant to them. What's been so interesting about Giving Tuesday is we've never had any brand guidelines. No one ever said you have to do a heart. No one ever said you have to do it in a certain way. But just the natural culture of the movement as it's moved around the world, anytime people have joined in, as you can see here, they've taken this central motif of the heart and put their own spin on it. And I think that's such a powerful metaphor for the way in which generosity can spread. Because generosity, of course, isn't just being kind to people, it's also trusting people. It's also making sure that you're giving them the gift of your trust, that you don't expect them to do the wrong thing, but you give them that great gift of expecting them to do the right thing. Conclusion number 2 when it comes to generosity is one about leadership. And I think we in the social sector often we celebrate the superstars, right? The dynamic individuals whose personal charisma transform the moment, and because of their own insight, the world is changed. And of course, many in that space have done good work, but increasingly in the new power world, the superstars are not doing as well as the superconductors. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is those individuals who are not shining, taking up the light, right, having all the light shine on them, but those individuals who are good at conducting the light of others, that collaborative ethos that is baked into the work of the Inovia Foundation. It's exactly that kind of work which from a leadership perspective is working in the new power world. It's those people who are working out how to build these coalitions, these communities, these broader engaging groups that are actually standing out. And I was very pleased to learn about work like the Laurie Vasey Fund as such a good example of the kind of superconductor leadership that I think is really beginning to make a big difference in our world today. There's a great line in Sherlock Holmes, in the Dr. Watson Sherlock Holmes book by Arthur Conan Doyle. And Dr. Watson is talking to Sherlock Holmes, and Holmes says to Watson, and he means this as an insult, he says, Watson, you are not luminous, but from time to time you are a conductor of light. And I think that insult is actually a great compliment now. That those individuals who are trying not to be luminous, but trying to be a conductor of light, are making enormous change in the world. And then conclusion number three, that pulses are greater than spikes when it comes to generosity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we've all been drawn into a world of spikes, right? The algorithms that shape our lives, the digital platforms we spend our time on, they are designed to grab our attention, to flash in our faces, to keep us on the platform for as long as we can, by provoking, by offering us things that outrage us, by offering us things that validate us, but to keep us tracked as we move into their world. And the world has reacted to this, right? So we think about our politics, we think about our entertainment environment, we think about our media, and the world has got very spiky very quickly, right? We are paying great attention to what's trending, to what's flaring, to what everybody's talking about. And I think what's happened with that is we've become so focused on the spiky world that we've lost sense of the pulse. And what I mean by the pulse is we've lost sense of, or we've certainly stopped paying attention to, those leaders and individuals who are doing things day after day, week after week, month after month, that are not particularly spiky. They're never trending, they're not getting all the news coverage, they're not the thing that everyone is outraged about. They're just good people doing good work time and time again. And I think that world of pulses is actually proving much more effective than people think. It doesn't get as much attention, but as you think about the generosity of changing the world, so much of that is actually long and hard work. So much of that generosity is nurtured by people, and we celebrate those people today with you. Those individuals who aren't about the single moment, but are about that constant civic pulse and maintaining that constant civic pulse that ultimately makes all of us healthier and all of us happier. So let me say to you today, I'm so honored to have the chance to speak to you today. I wish it would be in person. I hope that will be possible next year. I really want to salute the work of this community. The work you've done with Giving Tuesday has been remarkable. The work you have done to increase the generosity of your community during a pandemic is something which has been so inspiring. And today, as you take a pause to celebrate, I hope you'll all look back on what has been such a tough year for so many and recognize that the generosity you've offered this year will be more meaningful than any year in recent memory. That contribution really stacks up this year. And as we all bolster ourselves for a cold, hard winter and for a tough year ahead, we take great heart by the sparks of generosity that have been nurtured by this community. I congratulate all of you. I'm sorry not to be there with you. Thank you for all you do. Here is to generosity.